welcome to everybody who are listening us today. This is podcast Happy at Work. My name is Tatiana Koval, and today with my colleague Stacey Olson, we will discuss one of the most interesting topic. This is the topic of well-being. When we talk about employee happiness, it's all the time things about well-being. And today we will discuss what does it mean from a corporate perspective and how we could really improve the well-being of our employees. But before we start, Stacey, happy to see you in my podcast.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Mm. Stacey, usually I asked all my guests to say a little bit about them for professional, for personal side. If you want to share, for better understanding who as a person here in podcast, and I hope after that after our podcast, that people could follow you on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I do really appreciate the opportunity. So, yes, I'm Stacey Olson. I work with Gensler. I've been with the firm about 20 years, and I lead our wellness practice area. I co-lead that with my partner who sits in Chicago. And it's we have a so Gensler is a global architecture firm and design firm. We have, I believe, 34 practice areas. Wellness is one of them. And I also wear another hat, which is I'm a director of sustainability. And so I lead sustainability and wellness for both the region and for the firm. And it's really, I think, critical that those things come together, right? Because we know that we can't have whole wellness without environmental stewardship and health and well-being and the environment all come together. Sorry, I'm going off on a diatribe now, but yes, I'm very happy to be here. My background is in design, and I've work across all of our practice areas as wellness and sustainability do. Tend to be a lot of education as well as government uh, education, workplace. And really, by working across all of these different industries, it allows and affords me the opportunity to see lessons learned at all scales, which is really valuable, I think, especially for workplace, given our need to pivot many times, depending on what scale the organization is at.
Mm. Stacey, thanks a lot for participation because first time I met you on one of the conference and I was really impressed about what you talked about your approach for managing well-being, for improving well-being. And my first question for you, it's about your approach. I know what you use a special model for, I think, measuring, managing and improving employees' well-being. Could you please share this approach with my audience?
Yeah, I think really smart question to ask about, the different frameworks different organizations use. We use a framework that we will refer to as the 8 dimensions of wellness. And what that means is that we think about wellness in a very holistic way. And it takes us back to the why. Why do we care about wellness in the first place? And a big part of that is also understanding, well, what do we want to achieve by focusing on wellness, and what are our goals? And we think about this in demand for wellness. We think about, especially post COVID, people are increasingly aware of their environments, of how they feel, and historically, we have seen organizations apply single strand strategies to wellness. So it might be applying a fitness center or a single amenity like free food, or it could be something like a juice bar, right? We talk about that all the time, the yoga man and the juice bar. And in today's organizations, we know that we're facing big, hairy, audacious problems. We have extreme worker burnout. Gallup reports over 50% of knowledge workers are severely burned out. And Deloitte says that 60% of senior level management and leadership positions are severely burnt out. So it goes across the spectrum. And so when we think about the impact that has on our organization, You can't solve for that with a juice bar, right? It's nice to have these things, but they can stand on their own. So, what we think about is what we call, again, these 8 dimensions. And these help us think about the whole person or whole population health within an organization. And that's really thinking about everything from emotion to environment, to the social infrastructure within an organization, and so forth.
Mhm. Stacey, I know what you measure the employee well-being and based some of your decisions, some of your proposal to the management based on it. Could you share, please, your experience? How is it difficult to implement this approach? And with which model do you base your research? Maybe you could share some ideas how a company could implement this database approach for well-being. And also, how we usually, based on this data, find the solutions that really could have impact, not just in juice or yoga classes, as you
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
as you mentioned. I also agree absolutely with you, but the more deeply solutions which really could make an impact. Could you please share this database approach for managing well-being?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's another really good question because, measuring and understanding the issues within an organization is really the critical first step. And there's lots of ways to do that, right? Some people will express survey fatigue, but surveys are really a great way to solicit information from the folks in the organization. We have a tool that we've developed that compares both using science-based standards for assessing uh, organizational and individual wellness, well-being, happiness. Lots of different words to describe, but uh, comfort within a position, right? And like, so we use those uh, academic science proved questions paired with responses for, well, based off of, how do you feel you would thrive in this organization? And then how are you actually thriving? What's important to you versus what's your experience? And we use that to help uh, identify where there are the root problems, because that's really the important part. And the the crux, though, is that every time you issue something like a survey, uh, we really need to show and follow through that the responses of those that have been shared, right? People opening up and being honest and transparent, that does not go unheard, and that there is no follow through. There has to be an open and transparent acknowledgement of what an organization might be dealing with, and then a response. And that response then is also, we have to think about how this is not a one time line in the sand. Okay, we've heard this. We'll apply this solution. And even if it is a bespoke solution or an ecosystem of solutions, things change over time, right? So, what's really important is that when an organization embraces an ecosystem of wellness, that they're continuously uh, monitoring and adjusting. The adjusting part is really crucial because what solves today's problems might not solve tomorrow. We didn't know 5 years ago that we were going to have to rapidly upskill on AI. And so that has presented a whole new host of challenges within organizations and new stressors. And similarly, as climate change progresses, we will have new stressors and ways to manage risk within our organizations. And so these things have to be perpetually analyzed and responded to. And so a perpetual feedback loop is really great. I think a lot of times, and I don't know, I might not have answered the question uh, correctly, but what I think what's really important is that you might have a need for something like a fitness center, And we actually are seeing a rise in demand for that. And I think they're a really good amenity. But you might also get feedback that what you might have a lot of young parents, and what they really want is some kind of negotiated policy with a local childcare facility that allows for extended hours and discounted rates. And you don't know that until you start to have a dialogue with the folks in your organization to see what really is going to make the biggest impact on their lives.
Mhm. Stacey, maybe could you share from your experience um, some decisions which company made based on data, which in the beginning you don't think what it could be this way. Maybe you
Mhm.
have any other ideas, but when you see the data, you understand, as you said, a fitness club or a special policy for young parents or special place for the young parents. Could you share maybe from your experience how data helped you to make a right decision, the decision with
Mm.
more impact, but in the beginning, the cloud data, you have any other expectation that's interesting, maybe you had in the past this type of situation, which I asked. Usually, a lot of companies don't go deeply in data. They prefer to look around and to find the solutions through competitors or through benchmarks, and don't
Mm.
think deeply about data from the real company employees. So please, could you share maybe some insights you had in the past through the data?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think there and it looks different in every organization. I think, in some cases we're seeing uh, you know, increased meeting fatigue, right? We've gotten a lot of results that people are bombarded by post COVID, right? Back to back to back meetings, and it's exhausting, right? We don't have time that we used to filter into our schedule, that we used to hold in our schedules for meeting setup and meeting breakdown. Now it's 11 to 12, 12 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, right? And there's no capacity to be human, right? And so, what one of our really simple policies that we suggested in COVID was to always reduce the meeting time 5 minutes from the start. Right, we start at 10:05 instead of 10 o'clock or 9:05. That at least at a bare minimum get a 5 minute break between meetings. The other is we are venturing into a new policy where simplifying impact. So instead of wearing lots of people as they progress into leadership positions, they wind up piling on the hats. Right? I mentioned I lead wellness and also sustainability, but there are 5 other hats that I also wear. Right? And so what we're trying to do across our organization, and well, specifically test piloting it in our Newport office, but how do we simplify the number of roles any single person has, which actually gives more opportunity for advancement to other folks, right? If one person has 12 hats and the other has one, does that other person have the opportunity to go and show their leadership capacity and their professional development? So we're trying to simplify, diversify leadership, and also that means less number of meetings for any individual, and also joining meetings that we have to join, right? That are going to be something that we contribute to, that support our workflow and our professional development, of course, our client relationships. But meeting without an agenda is a conversation, right? And so all meetings should have agendas, right? And really they should, if they start at 10:05, they should have everybody there at 10:05. If people trickle in until 10, 15, then, then all of a sudden, like you're maybe repeating or you're having to start over, right? And of course, there's flexibility in everything, right? There's no hard and fast rules, but I think these policies, which are really like soft, suggestions, but if we abide by them, we can start to get a little bit more flexibility in our days, have more time for innovation, mentoring, things like that.
Stacey, everything you said for me have a strong connection with culture. So well-being should be a part of culture in the company because I met different approach. In one approach, well-being is just a part of compensation benefit policies. It's just a part of company's HR policy, not a core of culture. And our approach, it's about a strong connection between ideas or a people-centric approach. And really, well-being is a part of culture. So if you understand what we do something wrong, for example, we have some toxic persons in the company, a toxic atmosphere, toxic leader, or if we have, as you said, some problems in the processes which lead to burnouts, we need to change it. What is your approach to well-being, and how could you recommend to companies implement well-being as a part of culture in a way which you think it could be really effective for the business, not only for employees, but also for the business?
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, I want to pull on something that you mentioned. So, like when wellness is a part of a compensation package, it's interesting because and there is a need for that as well. For example, when we think about paternal leave and recently, so we've added some new great policies that help with reproductive health and in vitro fertilization, right? Because that is actually a quarter of couples now struggle with with reproductive health. So there, it's not to say that those things aren't needed, right? Those overarching policies. But when we think about accommodations for things like neurodiversity, that tends to create barriers to access. So, for example, well, rather than neurodiversity, let me talk just simply about physical health, right? Sit stand stations, right? If the policy within the organization is that anybody can have a sit stand, but you must ask for it, it draws attention to that person needing to make the first move, which can sometimes, depending on the personality, be a barrier to access for some people. Some people would, whether they're introverted or shy, or they just prefer not to call attention to themselves. They just want to be a good worker, don't want any special needs. They might be silently suffering when the accommodation is there, but it's not readily available. And so there are organizations that I know that try to combat that by saying accommodations, by limiting the barrier to access to those accommodations, that either everyone gets it or that the process for applying doesn't require like a human interface. It's just a check the box and it shows up. There's lots of different ways to handle that, but really good conference next week that I'll be attending is called the Disability Inn. And this is the largest conference globally that specifically talks about how professionals address disability and inclusion. And disability could be everything from neurodivergence, and ADHD and autism to capacities with sight or hearing or other autoimmune. It really, as soon as we put a label on it, then you've subsequently excluded another group. So I almost hate even giving a laundry list, but just wanted to give some examples of how vast disability it can be. It's the largest minority in the world, and it's one that any of us can join at any time. And it's also one that we all will likely join at some time in our life. So, thinking about an experience of having to go and ask for something can be a barrier. And so, I'm answering your question in a very long way, but I think that one thing that we want to do is try to design for the edges within our policies and our programming and our design approach. And what, again, that might mean is that everybody gets a task light. You don't necessarily need to be, have a vision issue. But, when you're working on that small, fine detail, you can then have control over your light settings and it can be beneficial. And simultaneously, it gives you autonomy and control over your space. And that is empowering. And giving people power and autonomy helps them to feel valuable and in control of their life. And that's a really good thing for retention and happiness. Um, I think another thing on the totally other side is that social infrastructure is a huge challenge for today's employers, really for the world. We're in a very uh, strange period of time where we're increasingly segregated, we're increasingly polarized, that there is so much nuance and so much attachment to the phone and to communicating without physical activity, that we're missing that dopamine connection and the serotonin from real life experience. And that is creating rifts in our culture. And what we're not going to become any less diverse as a culture. We'll be even more segmented as we move forward. So what we need to do is think about, how do we use design and programming and policy to foster social connection and to build camaraderie and the capacity for relationship making, because all of those things help an organization thrive. That people become stronger. There's a rich culture. There's commitment, and that takes different types of space. There's an architect that put out a really good um, synopsis of this called the hub, the haven, and the hangout. And I really like it. We there's different ways, different words that you can use. I think there's different folks that have these kinds of examples, but what this means is that in this social infrastructure, you've got three distinct kinds of spaces that do different things. But when they work together, they allow for everyone to feel like they can join groups that they're maybe not a part of or weren't previously comfortable with, but that they also have safe spaces. And then there's these spaces on the edges. So I would say that these things all work together. And again, it comes back to this ecosystem approach where it's never one thing, it's how these things are creating culture and identity for people to come together and thrive in.
Mhm. Uh, Stacey, thanks a lot for ideas and your explanation. And my next question, I want to back to begin into your approach and to your eight dimensions model. You mentioned some ideas which have connection with this model with some different dimension. Could I ask her about most popular dimensions you see the company focus on? Or maybe you could recommend which dimension for this model the company should work firstly if they want to go to a real well-being culture, a well-being policy.
Mhm.
Maybe could you share your experience?
Yeah, it's interesting to think. I think no organization purposefully uh, excludes any dimensions. But I think you're right that sometimes they pick off some kind of low hanging fruits, right? And I think that again, it's kind of easy to focus on um, when we think about professional development. I think a lot of organizations. Uh, can have like coaching or mentoring programs, maybe not all, but it tends to be something that we see. I think also that there is a big, especially when we think about like, if we look at tech spaces, I think really launched this, like the free food and beverage. I think that's something that a lot of organizations do. There's different ways of doing this so that it's healthy versus unhealthy. And so I think, programs like the American Heart Association has some really good guidelines on how to do this. We actually, I love our policies. We have free eggs and cheese and hummus and carrots. And so, if you're working through lunch, you can actually have a very healthy, light, fit lunch that will sustain you. And we just actually added some little chocolate bites, which is sometimes you just need that sweetness. But I think, a lot of organizations do the food. Um, Many I see today do sit stand stations, maybe not ubiquitously throughout, but at least on demand for request. And then, of course, following COVID, there was a bright spotlight on air quality. And in California, we're lucky we have code requirements for MERV 13 filtration, which is a really good level of filtration for particulate matter. But I think that there are a lot of rooms for improvement across the board. Just thinking about air quality for a minute, fantastic research out of Harvard about cognitive function and increasing the air exchange rates drastically improves all levels of cognitive function, everything from memory recall to stress management, and all of the other dimensions of cognitive function. So those kind of simple things are easy. I think that another thing that often gets forgotten, though, is inclusive design. And so while we may design different spaces with different furniture, we think we have to think about all body types and all abilities. What people might need are, do we have some chairs with arms and some without? Do we have different sizes? Do we have the right back support? And so forth. I think that's very important for creating a situation or spaces where everyone feels they have a space that they can be comfortable, and always having a surface, right, as well. um, there are some other gaps, and I think that that if we think about, again, wellness changes over time, really critical to understand and have that constant feedback loop. I think that's maybe one of the biggest things uh, that I don't see. I see some organizations are hesitant to launch surveys, either from survey fatigue or because they're concerned about what they might hear. And do they have the capacity to respond to what they've heard? Because if they don't have the capacity, they don't want, again, you don't want to create a situation where people have told you what a challenge is and then you don't fix it. So I think those are the big things that I think could always use some work.
Mhm. Uh,
Mhm.
Stacey, my next questions, I think you mentioned some of them, but my next question is specifically about challenges, which we usually company could meet when they decided to implement the well-being policy, because it's changes. So for all, for leaders, for employees, could you share what main challenges company could meet and how to overcome them, or to your advice?
Yeah, yeah. I think that a lot of organizations feel that wellness is expensive. And so there's some hesitancy again to provide a one size fits all solution. We think about all organizations, government, office, whatever, your retail, whatever it might be. Efficiency is like a driving factor in business, right? And that often means be very cognizant of budget, right? And confirming that whatever expenditures that you have impact. And so that leans itself to kind of more broad, one size fits all, because that is something that, we want to have the greatest impact with the least amount of expense. And that's fair, of course, right? We're all in business. But I think that sometimes we have a misconception that things are expensive when they're not. And for example, again, there's some really great research out of Harvard on the return of an investment on very simple well-being solutions. One of the biggest complaints that I know that folks get is with regard to temperature, right? And what they've done is they've studied, and you could find this. There's a great book. We can follow up later in a chat, but it's like, I think it's called Healthy Buildings. And what they've calculated is the return on investment from a knowledge worker being in a thermally balanced environment. What happens when you're super cold or super hot, and like it might even be 2 degrees out of the range that's acceptable, the standard range, is that you lose 2% productivity every hour. If you multiply that person's billing rate per hour by the hours a day that they've lost that productivity, it's a huge expense, right? And so something as simple as fixing the AC to make it more controllable, is very simple. Now, you could say, well, if you were designing this from a ground up, that means I might have to have more thermal zones. And you're right, and then that is an expense, right? But if you also think about, how can we do this in a way that creates the best atmosphere for our clients, or sorry, for our employees? Because at the end of the day, the most expensive thing in an organization is the people. And so if you can help them to be their best selves and to reduce turnover, you've got a huge return on investment. So we know that when a person leaves an organization, the cost of replacing them is gigantic, right? They not only you have to then find a new knowledge worker that has that same level of skill set, they have to upskill to the the worker culture, the company culture, and there is a huge loss of productivity for the whole year, right? No matter how talented that individual is. And so, helping to keep our folks happy and reduce turnover is a huge asset to an organization. And it's worth spending, in my opinion, a little bit of money on maintenance to help thermal settings. But, there's other ways of doing it too. Some organizations, and sometimes we design for this, depending on the client's, goals, but we create thermally separated zones so that you have designated areas of the office that are a higher set point than others, for people that run hot or run cold, right? And that way it's known that, if you want to, you can have open seating, you can work here or there. There's some back and forth on, how effective that is, but at the end of the day, giving people options and flexibility, again, helps with autonomy, and that helps with overall workplace experience. I think the other big thing where this hugely valuable is manager training, especially with regard to psychological safety. So we also know that a manager has a greater impact on a person's mental health and feelings of value, right? During the day, we spend more time at work than we do at home, right? And with our family. That how that interaction is can be hugely either damaging or rewarding to that person and to their professional success. And so when we think about, many times a person will become promoted into a position of management because they're really good at their job. Well, you're Sally Sue, you're really good at this. Keep doing it. Now bring this person under you and teach them how to do it too. And and now you've got a team of people that you're overseeing. Sally Sue might have no capacity for emotional intelligence, or maybe that's a harsh way, maybe it's some capacity, right? But she might not be well equipped with all of the tools to help that new person in that team be their best selves, be a very productive environment, have positive reinforcement, even if there's course correction that's needed. So like that management training for psychological safety and creating positive workplace environment uh, pays multiple dividends, and I find that that's not a typical component of a kind of an accommodations package, or you know a wellness package.
Mhm. Stacey, I know what you like the science. You're during our conversation, you making references to some of your research, and I know what you really like a science-based approach. Could you share your maybe life hacks, how to find new ideas and how to implement them in a real business life? For me, it's very important and also interesting how to really make a bridge between science and between the everyday business life. Could you share your approach?
Mhm. It's interesting. I mean, I do kind of consider myself a scientist. I maybe I nerd out more than others in our industry, but I I don't know that there's any exact answer, but being constantly curious, I think, is something I would suggest. Uh, I think that, as especially as climate evolves, and climate change evolves, and politics evolve, um, there's and technology evolves. There's something new every day. There's lots of something news every day. Just in my news feed today, I saw two new kinds of concrete that are being tested for their capacity to just naturally absorb CO2. Right, because we know that's a huge problem in the built environment. Um, uh, but I think being constantly curious, because there's lots of science out there, and then science is changing every day. There's lots of new studies. Even today, there was something in my news feed about Antarctica potentially already past the tipping point, and unclear if sea level rise will uh, the melting of the Arctic ice will happen in the next 100 years or 1,000 years, right? Or 10 years, right? But the tipping point is here. And I'm sorry, I'm talking more about sustainability right now, but like that's when I start to think about using science as a methodology for informing design, policy, and programming. It's we have to be, I think, constantly curious. And again, who knew that we lost so much productivity by being too cold, right? I think that having an open mind, and constantly realizing that we don't know all the answers, but it's okay to ask and to discover. It's also can be personally fulfilling to learn something new, right? I think constantly asking questions, staying informed, going to conferences, I think also is very valuable. Again, I mentioned the Disability Inn, which is in Orlando this year, next week. Um, I got to hear last year from some really wonderful organizations about their policies and how they used, a feedback informed approach to establish things like accommodations, and technology that they're deploying, and so forth. Um, but I think at the end of the day, when we think about science, it's not necessarily beakers and chemical experiments, right? We're talking about uh, like the concept of the theory of change, or the concept of like the hypothesis, right? If we have an idea about something, we want to test it, and then we should have some anecdotal evidence, and can we repeat that, and do we get the same result or a different one? because wellness is something that will always evolve, because our needs evolve. And so having that data informed approach is what I think is the kind of the science or the backbone for keeping us constantly addressing the needs that we have.
Stacey, thanks a lot for everything you're sharing with me, with our audience. And I have my last question. That's also a traditional question to all my guests. This is what three main tips could you give to all the companies who want to implement holistic approach to employee well-being?
What so can you phrase that one more time? Sorry.
What three main tips could you give to companies who want to implement holistic approach for improving employee well-being? Three main tips.
Yeah, yeah. I really think again, the first step is understanding the root cause of the challenges in your organization, because they will be different. And whether that's you want to, do like a charrette in the office where you put up a wall and people can put up stickies to write down their thoughts, and allow that to be up there, and we can absorb and see what the comments are, or if it's surveys, or if it's a program like Well or Fit Well. I think a lot of organizations are concerned about a check the box mentality, but in reality, these programs are ripe with scientific and data informed studies that are behind the strategies. And we think about it less like a checkbox, but more like a comprehensive reservoir of ideas that we can implement in our spaces, that we know and we have evidence will support the people in that space and have higher health outcomes. Those things are very valuable, and whether you go for the plaque or not is another thing that everyone needs to decide for themselves. But I find that leveraging this knowledge and responding in kind to what the employees are saying, and constantly having a feedback loop, those things will help you to unveil any challenges that you have, and then find solutions to solve for them. I think that on the other side of that, this is not everybody's cup of tea, right? And we all have lots of roles. I really think that it behooves organizations to maintain in-house folks that this is their passion, whether it's a person in an HR capacity or a director of wellness and sustainability, somebody that is also in a position to inform policy across either the office or the firm, and can have that position, because we know that while we need a bottom up grassroots, from the bottom, to be successful, it really needs to come from the top down and be allowed to percolate throughout the culture. And to that end, if managers are held to one set of criteria for performance that excludes the wellness, the sustainability, the psychological safety, then you're never going to get the embedded culture that you thought you were going to, right? It needs to be something that is valued throughout all levels of the organization, so that it can go both horizontally and vertically. And in that case, you start to see organizations that are like the blue companies, right? I think we're mostly familiar with Blue Zone, but octogenarians, folks that live over 100 years. But in like blue companies, you've got this embedded holistic culture. We think about was it Patagonia, or some of these where this lifestyle of the organization is that people respect planet and people, and understand that these things work together. and it's harmonious versus a top-down directive that thou shalt be well, right? That doesn't work, right? It has to be something that people feel innately that they're empowered to do, and that they're rewarded for doing, and that there are policies that support that, as well as the space that fosters it, like as I mentioned, like the social spaces and the connection, um, and then the policies might be the mentoring and the psychological safety, and then the programming might be that sensory free zone or the biophilia in the space, or the furniture, right? And all of these things work together. And when you come into a space like this, it does feel different, and the people feel different, and actually those organizations tend to also go for third party certification, and these tend to be the Well Platinum, the Fitwell 3-star, the LEED Platinum, and even the Living Building Challenge, right? So that's what I would encourage: being constantly open, and not feeling that that you have to solve the world's problems tomorrow, right? Because things evolve, and to have some patience.
Stacey, thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot for sharing your expertise, your approach, your ideas with my audience. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it, and anytime. I hope everybody is well and stay safe, and feel free to reach out with any questions.
Okay. Thanks, Stacey. This is podcast Happy at Work. Stay connected.